All right, great. Even the fact that I can pivot and do this on my phone and record it is a great blessing. So today's topic is self-worth. And I was reflecting on self-worth in the preparation as I was taking a walk today. And it is really a hot and deep topic in America, in personal development. And I would say the Western culture in general, but I'm only going to speak to America since I'm American. This need to realize our worth seems to run really, really deep in our psyches. And if you were to read some of the writings in other cultures, you'll find that this is not an issue that every single culture has or seems to have, right? Maybe it does have it and the powers to be aren't revealing that. But I can give an example. The Dalai Lama was at a talk and he was fielding questions and someone stood up and asked something about self-worth. And he had to get the concept explained to him. And he said, in our culture, we don't struggle with this. This is something that is an inherent knowing and doesn't seem to be in need of healing, which is interesting, right? When you think about that, because in the process of personal growth, coming into wholeness, I would say, if I were asked about the human condition, I would say that the human condition still has a lot of fear in every culture. And where there is fear, there's not really a direct experience of the worth of the human being that comes from an experience of the human being in my system of understanding as a soul and having eternal roots. You could go about self-worth in a lot of different ways, right? Even just psychologically or sociologically or anthropology. But from a spiritual theologian standpoint, that's how I look at self-worth, is that self-worth comes about when we awaken into the self, capital S, of who and what we are. And self-worth is weak where we are still operating from limited ideas of what we are. However, I could really respect the Dalai Lama's response because for our culture, it's really front and center. There's a felt sense of low self-worth. Whereas in other cultures, it may not be a question in relation to their happiness. So there may be still a need for healing of fear or other parts of the human condition, but maybe basic happiness or basic relational strength. There's not the question of how self-worth comes into that. Maybe not. Maybe any of you might know a little bit more deeply than me. I've never really taken on studying different cultures and their understanding of self in that way. But as I got to thinking about self-worth and the deep issue that it is and how each of us individually will have our own path to coming to self-worth. I mean, how many people, I'll refer to women here, though I'm not excluding men. I just happen to know a lot of women that they will come into their 50s and 60s and say, I finally realized that I am enough. Saying that up to that point, there was a sense that they weren't enough. And there was an understanding that they weren't enough, or a belief that they weren't enough, which says a lot about the understanding of self-worth in our culture. And it seems that those who have a strong sense of ego, and oftentimes because of the drive that's there, when the sense of self from an ego standpoint is crushed, can sometimes use that same drive to plunge right away into a realization of their worth on a soul level. I mean, how many times in a community or a culture, or we can see it in movies, we can see it in writings where the bad person, I was going to say the bad guy, but I don't want to make this gender, the bad person goes through a conversion and ends up being heralded as this amazing person. And that conversion leads them to becoming an amazing human being because they took that drive that was all about their ego, and the ego sense of self was destroyed, and that same drive existed, and they simply pivoted it into an authentic channel. The remarkable and iconic movie, The Mission, is a great example of that. The head slave trader, who was very vicious in his treatment of slaves and his attitude in general in life, in his conversion, he took all that drive. So he had all his drive for being like the best, I am. In fact, if anybody did something that he felt might be making fun of him in the slightest bit, he would challenge them to a duel, or he'd hurt them in some way. If they had a tinge of like, are you making fun of me? Like, he was so driven in this image of himself. And then what happened when he was crushed, he took all his drive and he went a different direction, not the authentic yet. He hadn't reached that. He applied all his drive towards what? Towards self-punishment. In order to repair for all of his sins, if you've seen the movie, hopefully this is a lovely recount. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's a powerful movie. In order to repair all the hurt he had done, he was going to climb this mountain to come to a place where the indigenous were waiting for him, the very ones that he didn't even consider to be human beings. And in the process, they were up at the top, and in the process of that, what he did is he created his own burden. And in this huge net, he put all of the things he would use to hurt slaves, to capture them, to accomplish his goals in life. And he put them in a huge bag and he tied it like a harness around himself. And what he did is he climbed the mountain. And more than once he fell. He fell because it was very steep and it was very muddy. And at a certain point, the indigenous, especially the younger ones, thought, this is ridiculous. Well, what do? They start laughing at him. And then they went and they drew close to him and they were laughing at how silly he was. And instead of having his ego response that he used to have of defending his honor, it was the opposite. He was touched. And he had become so open that he received their love and their jesting in the name of love. And they were so beautiful. The little ones were like pushing the hair out of his face because he was caked in mud because he had kept falling down. They were pushing the hair out of his face. And they started sawing his burden off his back. And he didn't want them to. He resisted. First he was upset. He really felt very strong that he had to be punished for what he did, which, as we know, is another form of a false sense of self. Punishing is not ours to do. But it was a beautiful gesture of feeling so wrenched in heart at what he had done, that he figured he deserved the worst. And finally, they sawed it off of him. And though he resisted, he then finally was forced to accept. And in that, they made way. They made way, and he got to experience himself as accepted by the very culture that he was the worst to ever. So therein you have a Western model of coming into self-worth. And this doesn't ruin the movie, believe me, it's such a moving movie. But you will see in this hero's journey of this man that all along the way, he butts up against himself and he has to keep challenging himself for what's really authentic, what's really in alignment with his personal answer to God, if you will, answer to God. Most of us, though, don't fall in that category of choosing a life that is that oppressive towards others. Most of us come somewhere in between where we've compromised ourselves for the sake of security or according to our own beliefs and that this is the right thing to do, even if it's a limited understanding of what to do. Most of the time we're somewhere in there where our connection to self, capital S, at our very center isn't solidified and isn't 100%. And therefore we find ourselves not always operating from that place. And hence that's why you've got the positive affirmation movement and all of the modalities that are tapping into the you are capable modalities. They aren't inviting us to step into a puffed up way of going about our wholeness. They are looking to repair the way the Western culture has done the middle road of honesty. So you have the ego way of hurting others. Then you've got this middle step where the punishment is there, where you pay your price, where you're unworthy, you don't deserve. That man felt like he didn't deserve for anybody to be nice to him. We oftentimes in our personal growth find ourselves in constructs that aren't free of that. And yet, what if that were off the table? Because all of the modalities that are out there that are getting us to do personal affirmations, I am love, I am goodness. And I'm part of that crowd, not 100%, as you well know, but I do believe in the efficacy of that vantage point because the connection to the self is so wounded. And how can we then, this middle road of part of our self-realization has to go through the trenches of I'm not worthy in order to discover the worth at the very center of our being. Well, one way we can do that is by giving ourselves the opportunity to sound through mantra the essential nature of our being. Now, I would actually love to do an entire retreat all on the concept of self-worth to break it open more, but we are only doing little nuggets in our Lenten meditation. So what we're going to do then today is we're going to do 3 Sanskrit mantras, and I'm going to pull them up right here. Okay. Very, very simple mantras. So the first one means my true nature is love and joy. The second one, I am wholeness. The third one, I am love. My true nature is love and joy. I am wholeness. I am love. And I'm going to use again my mala like I have before, but we won't do all 108 here. And what we're simply going to do is, I'd like you as you enter into doing this sounding, this toning on your side with your mute button on, is notice vibrationally what happens with each of these mantras. I will go ahead in the newsletter that gets sent out with this recording. I'll put the words. It's really too difficult for me on my phone with the record button on and all that's going on with the phone. So I will put the words, but they're quite simple. The first one is Aim, A-I-E-E-M, Aim Nama, Aim Nama, It's almost like I am, right? Aim Nama. Aim Nama. Second one, Aham Brahmasmi. Aham Brahmasmi. Aham Brahmasmi. And the third one, Aham Prema. Aham Prema. The reason I'm using 3 is so that you can kind of settle in a little bit and see if one of them really moves you a bit more. So Aim Nama, my true nature is love and joy. Aham Brahmasmi, I am wholeness. Aham Prema, I am love. And you'll just slip right into the toning. I'm just simply going to do a little inflection for each of them. So it'll be super, super easy. So here is to our self-worth. And if you will or want to with me, let's hold intention that middle piece where the way to come to wholeness is that we have to punish ourselves first, that somehow that is healed from the consciousness, that it's healed, that the tendrils that still weave their way into the psyche, that they're all pulled out and extracted, and that we can discover our worth from a place that is much lighter. So I invite you to close your eyes. Close your eyes. And we're simply going to do a number of recitations of the first one, Aim Nama, and then we'll go into the same number for the second, Aham Brahmasmi, and then the third, same format, Aham Prema. And invite in a breath and release. Invite in a breath and release. Invite in a breath and release. And we begin inviting in a breath. Aim Namah. 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 My true nature is love and joy. And after the next exhale, inviting in a breath, we begin our second toning. Aham Brahmasmi. 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 I am wholeness. Now to the next exhale, inviting in a breath, slightly different tone. Aham Prema. 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 And we sit together for a moment in the silence. With that, we bring this meditation to a close. I invite you to bring your palms together in front of your heart and open your eyes with Aho. Aho. I leave you with a reflection question to take a little journal time to consider what your thoughts are around self-worth and where you find yourself to be in that process, what your beliefs are, what limiting beliefs, what liberating beliefs. And let yourself come home to yourself in that reflection. So blessings, my friends.